want you to save my password. Hey, Elgin, go brush your teeth. I'm starting to stream, so go brush your teeth. Perfect. There we go. No. I want to be able to share you. I don't like how Facebook updates things all the time.
I know.
I'm sounding like an old person now.
No, you're not. You're just sounding like somebody who understands Facebook. They update things just to make us miserable.
I think it's like every time they come up with a new way to stalk us. They're like, oh.
Probably so.
Yeah, let's see. No. There we go. Yes. Talking about myself. All right. So I want to be able to see the comments, but not hear the Facebook stream. There we go. We switched time zones here. We did the fall switcheroo, and it hasn't happened there. So in the middle of the day, I realized that we were getting on an hour earlier.
Oh my!
That's when I was like, oh, that's why Elgin's still awake. I was like, go to bed. Daddy's going to play on the internet.
I hear something in the background. Is that some TV thing at your place, or?
I'll go check real quick. All right. Excellent. Now, let me get record stuff ready. All right. Perfect. Are you ready for me to hit record?
I am ready. I'm sure folks who are already tuned in are ready too.
All right. Boom. Hello, everyone. This is Tripp, and I'm here with Diana Butler Bass, and we are ready to ruin your dinner if the patriarchy hadn't already ruined it. How are you doing, Diana?
I did not sleep last night or the night before, so that's about how I'm doing. And last night I was looking at Twitter. I think that a fair share of the people who follow me on Twitter were having a hard time sleeping as well.
Yeah, that's 2 days in a row. Did you get a nap?
I did. Okay. I did get a nap. So I haven't been just like wired or on some sort of drug. So, I fall asleep when I can. But the truth of it is, I've been going to bed, and the level of stress here and anxiety around the election, around the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, it seems like the Supreme Court thing really pushed a lot of people, probably including me, a bit towards just high level stress. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a bishop in a denomination earlier today, and he was saying how hard it is for him to hold on to any kind of hope and to keep his clergy, sort of together, because people are kind of falling apart here.
Well, all of this on top of ongoing lockdown, on top of it not being in control, on top of a growing public, activism on different justice issues. And then I think, especially for people of faith, the level of disappointment you have in the body of Christ at this moment, primarily expressed in white evangelicals. But I mean, like you talked about a couple weeks ago, it's not like the percentages are ginormously different for any white dominant denomination. I think
Yeah.
I think that moment of realizing, especially for people of faith, the level of disappointment you have in the body of Christ at this moment, primarily expressed in white evangelical, but I mean, like you talked about a couple weeks ago, it's not like the percentages are ginormously different for any white dominant denomination. I think that moment those feelings you had about like those few people close to you who make no sense, how their character allows and permits a kind of affirmation of just morally vapid commitments, that's true all over, and it just adds up. And
yeah, I had a bit of a squall on Facebook with my sister-in-law. I've talked about how my brother doesn't talk to me, and I've never even met her, but I have been able to see her social media, and she posted something that was so abominably untrue and frankly just stupid this last week that I literally threw a comment up and then I took it down. And guess what? She saw it. And so so then she blocks me. And because I'm good at social media, I could still see what she said. And she was like insulting me because I literally said that the Babylon Bee did not report factual information. And it was like,
are you sure? Because the president tweeted it like it was real.
Well, that was that same day. The president tweeted it like it was real. And I happened to just kind of be cruising around. I went over to her Facebook page. I was curious to see how she would respond to it. And she put up some really, hopelessly awful post that seemed to indicate she thought what was being reported in the Babylon Bee was real. And all you needed to do was Google what she was talking about, and you could see that it wasn't true. And it's like, just one, I kind of just lost it then, because it's what's happening to all of us. Seeing these kinds of things coming up on our Facebook feeds, hearing them from our relatives. I've got other friends who are more like, your family, where you're hearing stuff from people directly. That's just, it's things that are just not true. My cousin posted a thing on her Facebook page, and she hasn't blocked me, which is nice enough. But she posted a thing about how Joe Biden was a murderer, and how Joe Biden had murdered his first wife and his daughter, and that he did this so he could control his two sons and turn them into sort of, I guess, functionaries of his wicked worldview, and then married the babysitter. And my cousin is, the other thing she posts all the time are these really nice memes about Christianity and how Jesus is with you and things that have hearts and flowers. And so there's these nice posts, and then there's flowers, and then there's Joe Biden, the murderer, and more QAnon and more Jesus. And it was like, what the freak are people even thinking?
Yeah.
Joe Biden is a murderer. That's the Hillary Clinton playbook from 1992.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's what it is. I was this afternoon, I talked with a chemistry professor here at the university about research stuff, but he's from Saudi Arabia. Oh. And international people love to talk to an American about our politics. So I regularly get these questions where they are trying to find out if they're allowed to ask questions, and then it just starts, pouring. And he started asking me questions, and I'm like answering them. And I said something about it's just really disappointing when you see people still, supporting Trump. And he paused and he goes, still, well, did they vote for him the first time? I'm like, yeah, but it's just like, she's grading worse. And he's like, but didn't he become popular because he thought Barack Obama was born in Africa? And I was like, yeah. He's like, Trump, racist sack of shit forever. And everyone should know that. And I was just like, you're hilarious. And he's just like, I don't understand. You Americans, you make so many excuses for your worst people. And now the rest of the world finally sees you getting upset. Like, how bad do they have to be? I'm just like, yeah, you're right. You're right. But you take that, just that idea of like, he was a birther. Why are we surprised? It's just,
right.
But now he's like postulating, the QAnon theory of coronavirus and stuff from Stage. You got Mark Meadows' thing, this he's like, we don't have a plan to deal with it. Man, I had no idea that the way Trump was going to get our head to spin was his like just inability to even act in his own self-interest at this point. It's like,
Yeah.
if you use this crisis, he could have got so much money from the Democrats for a bailout that the economy would have gone great, and every moderate person would have said his tweets are crazy, but instead he was like, you think that's a cool way? Check this out.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought the same thing. You know, all that needed to happen is that he just needed to trust some level. I mean, he didn't even have to personally believe that coronavirus was true or personally believe the scientists. All he had to do was sort of trust on some level that they had some insight into an event that was going to occur. That was all that he had to do. And then say, what should I do? And follow whatever they wanted him to do. And he would have gotten huge monetary packages from the Democrats. And anybody that says they're voting for him because of their 401k, having a 65-year-old husband and me being 61, believe me, we look at these things. It's been insane for the retirement portfolios of people who are our age, who are looking ahead just 3, 5, 7 years in the future that we are going to need to live on that money. It's literally like this. Trump tweets and it drops like a rock. And so I actually talked to this person who helps us with our accounts, and they're holding on like this, hoping Joe Biden wins. I mean, these are Wall Street people hoping Joe Biden wins, because the only thing they only want stability, and that's kind of what you're pointing out, is that Trump didn't have to believe anything. He didn't have to think coronavirus was real. All he had to do was sort of look into the future and think to himself, what's going to get me the most votes? Well, if people's stock portfolios, white retirees, stock portfolios aren't going like this, that's going to help. Or suburban women might like to have their children back in school. That's going to help. Or people might like extra paychecks in their pocket because they can't work. That's going to help. And he could have bought votes, and he didn't even do that. And it's like, that is the piece, Tripp, that I have looked at this and I keep thinking to myself, maybe he really, I've known people like this. They don't want to win and they don't want to lose. And so it appears that although he's really worried that, he's going to go to jail or get prosecuted or what have you on the other end of this, I think that he also doesn't really want to win. And so I think that what we're seeing right now is we're living through a period of just sort of massive self-sabotage on the part of the president of the United States. And that's psychologically a really unbalanced thing to do. And I recognize it because, frankly, there have been times in my life when I've done similar things like that, when I couldn't see myself succeeding. And so I set myself into a place where I would lose. And I've learned to get over that, as I went through my life. But it is a kind of a tendency that sometimes people who are very ambitious or high achievers wind up, getting themselves embroiled in. And so I've seen that with Trump, and it's just like, it's not a good thing to live near. I mean, it's terrible for all of us.
Yeah, definitely on the terrible side.
Yeah.
One of the questions that came in earlier, but also people have discussed it on a couple of the streams currently, is how, as Christians, you process like having such a strong commitment to who wins this election, when a lot of us, it wasn't our ideal choice, but also just because of, when it comes to foreign policy, Joe Biden has been, supportive of a large amount of the military-industrial complex regularly, and part of that's because of the state he came from. they the financial industry, because of the state he came from, both those
Yeah,
have a big impact.
chemical and financial industries in Delaware. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in Dover, the Air Force Base plays such a huge part of the economy, and just in general, like who it is that gets promoted and then survives and thrives in a political system. A lot of them already have a type of logic for processing international things that's just a lot more friendly with violence than it seems most Christians, and both the couple of questions that came in related to it, know from just things I've said or you said that we are. And I think it's important to say that. And we'll probably talk more about this next week when Adam Clark's on with us the day after the election, because, I feel like this election for me is one where I have no problem saying I really think everyone should really vote for one person. Mm-hmm. And then the day after, when we get on, I'm going to say that there are real things as the body of Christ we have to pressure him to act and do, right? And part of it is Joe Biden's legacy of the kind of compliant for, of American imperialism and using our military industrial complex in all sorts of ways. But how do you think about framing that conversation? Because it involves a type of complexity that a bumper sticker or my sweet vote 2020 thing doesn't necessarily imply, right? And as Christians, having conversations about discipleship and politics is not easy, because even if you pay attention to politics, you're paying attention to what crazy thing Trump tweeted, and then when a person running for election thought they needed to say to win the swing votes in their district, not to tell us how they think and process things.
Right. Well, that's the place where I've actually changed and grown a lot over the last 6 or 8 weeks as I've been talking about religion and politics so much with this community, very consistently. But I've also been working with a couple of churches over that same period of time. And it's been a really great experience for me, because it's helped me refine what I think. And I think the most helpful thing for me was to realize that I actually have operative 2 different ideas about politics. One is this idea about what is the vision of the polis? What motivates me? How do I understand as a Christian the biblical vision of the city that we inhabit as human beings, and what relationship that is to the city that is to come, the city of God. So, it's a really, really old question, the Augustinian question. And in that way, I see the question like Augustine did, but I don't really kind of see his answer in quite the same way. Is that I have very strong, high sort of visions, expectations, almost lyrical understandings of what that polis should be like. Nonviolent, completely a community of equals, based in compassion and empathy, that justice is the natural sort of act that emerges from the life of the people who are sharing a meal around a table together. I mean, I can preach about that stuff forever, and I hold on to that. And yet there's this other thing that's also politics, and that's what you're talking about, what is harder to cope with, and that is the mechanics of the political processes that we live in. And the mechanics of those things are everything from how do you govern, once you hold power in a world that's flawed, wounded. We can use the language of fallenness if we want, however we want to talk about that. And very wrapped up in a particular economic and social structure that is, call it military industrial complex. Dwight Eisenhower called it that. And that clearly runs against the kingdom, this kingdom, however you want to call that. And then the actual process of elections, the stupid tweets, the dirty tricks, the power plays, and all that kind of thing. And so both of those things are operative. And on one hand, I just kind of pay attention to which arena I'm working on. It doesn't mean that I'm divided. I actually am the same person in both directions. But I recognize that both of these aspects of politics are operative. And so sometimes when I'm preaching or when I'm trying to get people out of the rut or imagine a better world or not just sort of cave in to whatever happens to be, I'll be over on this side with the lyrical, poetic, theological vision. But an awful lot of our lives are spent in the mechanics. And that's more the kind of place where, I don't really love this, but I think he was mostly right, is Reinhold Niebuhr, talked about that all the time. There's this kind of unpleasant, sinful realism that happens in the mechanics of how we govern and how people gain office. And it's over in that area that we often have to find ourselves making compromises that we wouldn't make in a less wounded and more fully healed world, a world that was more full of shalom.
So about, like, when you say that, what pops in my mind is, which I appreciate Niebuhr the most of my peers, but
people hate him.
Adventures of Ideas, Whitehead talks about that too often his students who become, he uses infatuated, but it's like romantic about a vision, not infatuated in the obsessed with a potential sexual partner, but infatuated with these visions of peace, that then they don't realize that to make progress is not so much the ability to cast a vision, but the artful decision as to what to conserve. And he's making this observation about politics, but it comes from his work philosophically and primarily looking at the history of civilizations and thinking it through his kind of biological evolutionary lens. The artful gift of figuring out what to conserve. And so in dialogues that Lucien Price recorded of his work, he said that America has not cultivated a group of idealists who attend well to the mechanics of its dream. And
I did not know he said that. And that's kind of what I felt like I fell into in these last 6 weeks, is to really think about those two things in their relationship.
Yeah, and so there's this situation where you can be too attached to the mechanics of the dream. Then love the mechanics. Like the minister who's never preached a sermon to make their congregation uncomfortable, never questions how much of the budget is on the church and not the community, like those type of things. But you can also get to a place where your desire for perfection and vision and beauty never leads you to leave a material world different than you left it. And I feel like you need both of those tensions. And but the game of politics makes it so hard to do both of those. So that split self you were talking about, I think a lot of people have it. You have it as a parent and then wanting to be friends with your child. You have it as a minister, but also just a fellow disciple in the congregation. You have it as a citizen, and then as someone that's trying to like convince people to go one way, but also like, I don't want to like lure enough moderates over to this side that then Joe Biden doesn't pack the court. Like there's just like, it's real practical. Like I'm like, no. And so this is I had a conversation with a thread of a number of Southern Baptists, and I kind of lost it today.
I'm not surprised. But everybody's losing it, Tripp, by the way.
and they were saying the things I've grown up as a Baptist saying, like, we love separation of church and state, right? Like Baptist separation, church and state, huge deal. We want freedom of conscience, religious liberty, all these type of things before the new version of what those mean. And I'm just like, I don't know if I do anymore. We said all that stuff. And then the Southern Baptist Convention was taken over by Jerry Falwell and company. They stole the seminaries, they imposed beliefs, and then they said they were doing it for good reasons. Now they've done the same thing to the courts.
That's right, they have.
They're stealing voting rights to make sure white guys get to pick the president and the Senate and the House. Like, At what, like, so I feel like that a lot of the things I was told and I really believed and did as a Christian growing up as a evangelical in the South were really just cover for the most putrid death dealing political regime. And here they are doing something that so many of the generation above me in Southern Baptist life experienced. This act of violence of the takeover is now happening at the government level. And you're seeing your like moderate minister friends in the South convulsing over it. And then I talk to my LGBTQ friends or my Muslim friends, and they're like freaking out about what's going on.
Yeah.
Because they know they were so recently debated about their viability as citizens and their full rights. And now Trump's like packed the courts and done all this stuff. And then they look at their like moderate mainline friends and they're like, well, I mean, I feel like we need to be open-minded here, and we don't want to break an institution, and we're really getting robbed. Like, that's how I feel. And I feel bad not believing in the vision, but my family is like full of like committed American military people and Anabaptists, right? So I have both of those streams running through me, and this whole process is like making me have this self-doubt about how much of the things I really believed were just scripts handed to me so that I could perform the things necessary to give them power for a different agenda.
Well, that's really powerful, Tripp.
I don't know what to do with it. You want to fix my problems?
Well, I'm not sure I can fix your problems, except, the first thing I just think of when you're talking about all that is the vision of salvation that I hold on to, that is what I believe the work of Jesus is, to make whole what is broken. And so in this moment, the world is broken, but we're also split. And so to feel disintegrated in our own selves means that somehow we aren't leaning toward or have not paid attention closely enough to the salvation that is constantly being offered to us by Jesus for that integration. And so I would really, I mean, this is me talking myself in certain kinds of ways, is that to feel the disintegration is to remember sin and brokenness, and how deep that goes, including into my own heart. And that is that call towards where is the Christ in making this whole, making me whole, and also in then making the world around me whole. And so that helps me just kind of pray more, meditate more, open my eyes more to where the working of Jesus might be. So that's the most pious Diana that you're going to get in this, and it's also the truest one, because I'm such a Jesus person. So that's kind of my first thing. My second thing is it isn't just Christian theology that has been corrupted in this way by certain kinds of people who have figured out how to use ideals and ideas that are quite beautiful against people who are quite kind. And so I am thrilled that you mentioned the Southern Baptist Convention, because I have been thinking for quite at least the last year how I've seen echoes of the Southern Baptist fundamentalist takeover strategy from the 80s in Mitch McConnell. And it's like, where does that even come from? I don't think he's a Baptist. I don't know what he is.
Everyone in Kentucky's a Baptist.
Well, that might be true. He might be a Baptist.
I've even told all the Methodists are Baptists in Kentucky. That's what one of my Methodist former Claremont students said. She went to a church in Louisville, and she's like, you wouldn't believe this, Tripp. Everyone in Kentucky's a Baptist. They just want to vote and have an opinion and all sorts of things that are just as Baptist as could be. And I'm like, those songs aren't in our hymnal. And they're like, but they should be. Anyway.
All of a sudden, I feel like our Methodist friends, especially people that I know around Asbury, are now freaking out. No, we're not Baptists. We're Methodists. So, but that's another conversation for another day. So they've taken those things in the same way the mean Southern Baptists took really beautiful stuff and then used it as a way of controlling and destroying people who never imagined that the best things about being Baptist could be used against them as a weapon. So that's happening, but it's also happening, as you point out rightly, with our political process. And that's where I've been going crazy in the last week, is with Amy Coney Barrett, because feminism has been used as one of those weapons in her confirmation. Literally women are being told, you can't say anything about this because, feminism says that every woman has the right to, have her own opinions and her own career. And look at this. Isn't this just amazing? Is that literally they're saying things like, we now have a conservative woman on the Supreme Court. And isn't that the best expression of feminism going? And yesterday, it's like, no, it is not feminism. When you use feminism to then turn around and try to control other women, that's not feminism. Just like using religious liberty is not religious liberty to scream religious liberty and then take religious liberty away from everybody else. It's using a beautiful idea as a tool to forward your own power and to enrich yourself or your group. And so at that point, the people who those things are being used against, have every right and responsibility to then point out and say, no, that's not religious liberty. No, that's not feminism. No, that's not democracy. And it's something else. It's authoritarianism. It's fascism, whatever you want to call it. Fundamentalism is what, we called it in the 80s with the Southern Baptists. And so that's just wrong, and it's evil. And the problem is that too many nice people don't want to call it that. So, just last night on Twitter, I wrote out a tweet, and I was angry at the confirmation. And I said, Amy, we don't believe you. We don't believe that you're politically independent. We don't believe you that you're nonpartisan. Nope, we don't believe you. And some really nice person, seemed like a nice woman, who said she was a pastor in her bio, I believe, came back at me and said, well, you may not like what she says, but call her Justice Barrett, because all women deserve respect. And I didn't answer the tweet, but the truth of the matter is no, they deserve dignity as a human being. I called her by her first name. I didn't call her you slime bag. I didn't call her a whole bunch of other names that you could call a woman.
Yeah, you were not presidential, Diana. You should have been more presidential.
I should have been more presidential, correct. I called her by her first name. And the truth is that some titles and some forms of address actually come because people have earned them. And they have earned the respect of that title. And in this case, I am sorry, but a woman who has behaved in the way that she has, with the particular credentials that she has in order to have gotten to this place on the Supreme Court, it doesn't match the level of respect that should be accorded to the title Justice of the United States Supreme Court. It's the same reason that you will look at my feed, and I think that I've probably called Donald Trump president maybe once in the last 4 years, because he has never earned the respect of that title. I've tried to treat him as much as possible with the dignity of being human. And that's been so hard sometimes, even for a person like me. I was paying a lot of attention to trying to do that. And I certainly tried to do that with Amy Coney Barrett, is that they are human beings. They get the respect of their names. They get some level of respect of my time and the respect of my being willing to argue with them. But they don't get the respect of the office because they haven't earned it. And see, that's the kind of thing that nice people can't differentiate between. And yet it's an obvious differentiation. And it gives us the power to be able to critique fairly, but also within enough of a framework of Christianity that we can recognize the humanity of the person whom we are opposing, whose ideas we're opposing, ideas and actions we're opposing.
Yeah, I have to admit that I was a bit miffed by all the people that thought the Democrats would come up with something to delay or stop it, because
There's
I
nothing.
haven't noticed a backbone in the Senate for a while. So ever since they had the majority and didn't figure out a way to actually pass the healthcare bill that almost every Democrat really wanted, like one or two people's opinions just miswayed them. They're like, well, I don't want to force anyone to have a hard vote. What has the Senate not done? Not asked to have a reauthorization of military force. That seems like a reasonable thing for like the Congress to push through when we had all the votes. It's not got back through. It's like the idea that this would finally be a time. I just have low expectations. But Dianne Feinstein,
that was appalling.
Like congratulating on the process from California.
Appalling.
Like, as someone who has paid more taxes to California than I'll probably pay to any state unless I move back there. Mm-hmm. Like, I paid more taxes in California than I pay in the United Kingdom. And well, I guess if you count that I pay for healthcare, then it's not as much. But you know what I mean? Like, if you don't count the healthcare part. And I'm like, you know what this state's full of? Someone who would never tell that guy thank you for running roughshod over the will of the American people. What you just said a few years ago, like, the Senate in this whole thing has displayed why that recent study that millennials and everyone younger just don't even believe we have a real democracy anyway, and then are befuddled on the institutions. And so, like, I really think there's a reason that the first 100 days, like, of a Biden administration, Lord, hear our prayer, would use the initial power just to force through things that make things more democratic, even if it limits progress in the short term. Just the fact that, for example, like making DC and Puerto Rico states,
right?
Like,
and
you live in DC.
The DC bill actually has been on the desk of the Senate since, I don't know, February or March, because the House passed it. And right. And so that was the first time that the House had passed it, I think, in the last 15 or 20 years. It had been passed once before, a long time ago. So I hope that goes. But, this is that problem of the mechanics, and there were a couple of interesting moments, I thought, in the Senate around the whole process. I thought Chris Coons presented some, elegant and truthful arguments about why she shouldn't be confirmed, and that he used his time well. And Sheldon Whitehouse kind of pulled back the curtain on exactly what you're talking about in front of his colleagues, using his time not to argue with Coney Barrett, but instead to show that the Senate had in effect failed. And then, there were some really surprising votes yesterday that came from the Democrats. I mean, Doug Jones, for example, in Alabama, who, he probably could have garnered 50 votes if he had decided to vote for her from people in Alabama. But he didn't change his conviction, and that he voted for what he thought was truth. And he saw, I mean, we literally have the Senate we have right now because some people like Heidi Heitkamp and Claire McCaskill at Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation voted against him, and their voters their voters in red states held that against them, and so Claire McCaskill and Heidi Heitkamp were, shown the door, and so that's going to happen to Doug Jones too, and yet, the truth of the matter is that those people then leave with their integrity, and so there were moments of that in these confirmation hearings, and I always want to praise those, when I see them, because they hold up a level of moral action and how you deal with the mechanics of an unfair process to other senators. And the whole thing isn't completely corrupt. There still are some really good people there, I think, who even use this difficult circumstance to retain a vision of what it means to be a fully moral person. And so I want to praise that while also saying, yeah, there are really serious problems here that need to be fixed. And a big part of the problem is that Mitch McConnell has been in charge of it and purposefully destroyed some of these practices that allowed for more dissent from the minority. And so, what comes next, boy, that's going to be anybody's guess.
Yeah. Well,
I see Robyn.
I know we are joined by one of my favorite humans on the planet we call Earth, Dr. Robyn Henderson-Espinoza, an academic and activist, lover of high quality craft beer, delicious home cooking, conversations with friends, and you, Diana, the number of people who are homebrewed fans and love when Tripp and Robyn get together is so high. I got sent a long email that said, I talked to some people. Tripp, we've heard you and Robyn talk about all sorts of things. Here was a list of topics we discussed that you could just bring up and you not say anything and let Robyn and Diana talk, which, I understand why they're saying this, because since 2008, I've had episodes of me saying stuff about everything on the internet. So I couldn't tell if it was an affirmation of you two or a request for me to shut up. But after the initial bit, I have a series of 5 questions homebrewed community members voted on for you two to talk to each other about. And
I'm getting pencil and paper.
I know. That's why I said, all right, I'll go along with this. But first,
I haven't seen Robyn since Wild Goose, and then just in passing. So it's good to see them.
Yeah. Hi. How are you?
Hi. Good.
I was listening to the live stream when it started, so I could get the context, and I think about politics in a similar way as you do, Diana. The sort of mechanics of it, but also the vision, the utopic vision of God. And so I really appreciated that. And so I'm like, oh, this is going to be a great conversation.
I just think the world of you, and I've been looking forward to this all week since Tripp told me.
Thank you.
So my first question, Robyn, for people that don't know you, and we briefly mentioned being Baptist life in the South.
Right.
You are a product of Texas Baptist, which is its own brand, both Texas and Texas Baptist. That's right. Like the specific mixture of hickory and mesquite you use when you smoke brisket specific.
Exactly. Yep.
Could you briefly introduce us your story as someone who comes out of Texas Baptist life, introduced to Paul Ricoeur in undergrad? I remember you talking about that experience, to then going to California, doing your PhD, and then choosing to come back to the South. Because I think one of the questions people sent who know you well and know Diana, if they know some of your vocational calling as a scholar, activist, and Christian, it helped them understand why people sent these particular questions.
Well, so I was born and raised in Texas and left when I was 26 for graduate school in Chicago. And, Texas Baptist life it has a sort of independent flavor to it, as a lot of Texans have in their politics. But you know, Texas Baptists were dissatisfied with the Baptist General Convention of Texas, and so there was a lot of effort poured into the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship when that was emerging back in the day. And I think that what I liked about Texas Baptist life, and what I initially liked about the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, though I have since more aligned myself with Anabaptist thought and sort of radical Baptist, sort of free Baptist. Though I'm really in line with what you said, Tripp, around the script that you were to perform to that undermines liberation and that cements oppression, basically. So I hold the complexity, but in terms of ecclesiology and theology, I'm much more Anabaptist and sort of radical Mennonite. But what I really liked about Texas Baptist life and the energy that was being put forth in Cooperative Baptist Fellowship is a true egalitarian vision in an ecclesial sense. Now, it didn't include people like myself, trans and queer, but it did include women. And while I don't vote for incremental change, Cooperative Baptist life and Texas Baptist life 20 years ago had a vision for egalitarianism. Now, that has since changed, and Texas Baptist life is very fundamentalist, and Cooperative Baptist life is not where I would want to see it now, which is why I sort of disassociate with the institutional church. But you know, my leaving and returning came really after the 2016 election. I left my faculty post in Berkeley, moved home to the South, but didn't choose Texas, chose Tennessee, Middle America. A friend of mine who we probably all know, Tony Jones, said, you need to go hang out with real people. Start going to the Walmart and you know, talk with real people. And so I was like, well, I can move to Nashville, Tennessee and start hanging out with real people. Ended up launching my scholarship as a collaborative project. And so I do this sort of scholarship and activism thing as a public theologian. But really the work of conversation and the work of public theology really stems from a vocational call of getting my hands dirty with people and being in deep relationship and really stewarding the kind of humanity, the kind of vision for humanity that will build the kind of world we long to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's actually the perfect setup for the first question. So these are homebrewed community members, very familiar with both of you, and I'm not supposed to say anything after I ask the question. If you phone a friend, I guess I will, but you know how that is. So the first question is, I would love to hear Dr. Robyn and Dr. Bass discuss the way being both academics and on the ground invested in the spiritual political life of their particular communities has challenged their presumptions they bring in as scholars. So what kind of on the ground experiences have challenged the theory and vision you've had as scholars? See, that's a high quality question.
It is.
I know they had discussed back and forth, and then we're like, I'm not even going to let you ask questions, Tripp. We're just going to give them to you, and you're not supposed to say anything. So with that, that's question one.
Oh gosh, Robyn, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
It doesn't matter. I'm happy to go and work my way through the question, or you can. I have no preference.
I'd love to hear you, since people have been listening to my voice for a bit, and then we can trade the order around the next question, I guess.
Okay. One of the biggest challenges that I have faced in doing on the ground work in Middle America, in the American South, is that my vocabulary has had to change. Tripp, you know some of the theory that I read, and not everyone has, not only don't have access to it, and wouldn't know what the hell I'm talking about when I use the Deleuzian language. And so my language has had to change, and I've had to really lean into what it meant to grow up bilingual in between Spanish and English, and rest in the translation space. And I've had to learn how to become a translator of theory to action. That's one of the biggest things that has shifted for me. The other thing is learning to develop an analysis of what's happening in the world that is intelligible to the layperson, which is another vocabulary thing, another language thing, but it's also a second step of how do you help people connect the dots. And so there's been a developing an analysis, but an analysis that doesn't give the full picture, but that actually connects the dots for people. That's been a huge thing that was a surprise for me, because I think spending so much time in academia, because I took 3 years off between seminary and my PhD, but really during those 3 years, I was still going to AAR. I was still very, engaged in the discourse. And when you take a step back and you begin to talk with people who are broken and hurting and just want to see a different world, you can't just say, well, the folds of becoming are upon us, because they have no context for that. And so I have had to learn how to connect the dots from a place of lived experience. And so I draw a lot on growing up in poverty with my Mexican mother. I draw a lot on being a survivor of childhood sexual trauma. I draw a lot on just these broken moments of my life that are not welcome in the academy, and probably won't ever be, right? So I think that's what I would contribute to that question.
I'm about to fall out of my chair because I had written down on this little piece of paper next to me that the two things I changed the most were my vocabulary and how I understood the experience of lay people, which are
oh my goodness,
which is exactly what you just said. And the fact that would come out of two people with such different kinds of life experiences kind of blows me away.
Yeah.
But I mean, I grew up middle class in the middle Atlantic, in the middle in a sense of Methodism, which I think is the most middling of all denominations. And so I kind of grew up in the middle of white America. And yet the things that we do share, which are trajectories, which I've recognized in your work, is the issue of trying to control someone else's body, and sexual violence, which those are things that we do have in common. But this whole thing about the academy, I've been out now for a long time, even though I think anybody who reads anything from my biweekly newsletter to books that I can write recognizes that there's this substrata in which I'm still dealing with academic questions. And And so I'm still shaped by that. But as a writer and a mother, I think those are my two sort of most formative experiences of what it is to live beyond the walls of the academy. And as a writer, you have no idea. I mean, I'm sure you do actually. But my editor changed my entire life by the fact that my early books, he would get a draft and he would say, just stop it. Just stop the jargon, stop it with all the trite phrases. Don't dress it up. Tell people, assume that people have no idea what you mean and just use regular words to explain it. And so you can actually see a progression in my books where there's some academic language in the first couple of them. When I talk about like retraditioned or retraditionalism and some things like that, it's like you try to use that in a church basement when you're giving a lecture to a group of people at a Presbyterian church in Milwaukee, and they look at you like you're nuts. And so I've left that kind of vocabulary behind, and my vocabulary has become of a different sort. And for me, that different sort of vocabulary leans now a lot more heavily into what I would call poetic vocabulary, is that I take seriously the literary kinds of pieces of the life of a writer. And so prose and poetry, image, trying to capture in words pictures that will motivate people who read my books. So vocabulary changed for me. It's been a huge transformation in my writing. And people who have followed my work for a long time have noticed that and have encouraged me there. So first thing. And then the second thing is I have moved, especially in more recent years, further and further away from ideas of hierarchy and elitism. And stuff drives me crazy because the academy is a kind of institutional life that claims to be egalitarian, but masks some of the most vicious forms of patriarchy and elitism that there are. And so being outside of that structure, the structures of tenure, the structures of, what does it take to become the president of AAR, what have you, has been very freeing for me and has allowed me to take much more seriously the life of everyday people as a appropriate framework. Because I'm an everyday person, it's just like, I'm no different than anybody else. I just happen to write books. And so it takes me toward thinking about frameworks of meaning that come out of the experience of people in their regular lives. And so that was motivated by both my increasing anxiety and rejection of hierarchies and elitism, but it was also very much framed by being a mother. And when you got a kid and you're trying to grow a kid and nurture a kid in this particular society, you have to take their experience seriously. You have to learn how to listen to how other people frame the world and not go in and say, I'm going to be the teacher. And so I'm going to tell you everything piece of wisdom I've ever gotten in my entire life. And you tell that to a 7-year-old and it gets you absolutely nowhere. And so for me, those are the two things. And I think that there's one kind of third piece of it. And Robyn, I don't know if you felt this, is that I've had to be able to accept the fact that I will not have the kind of respect from my former colleagues that I imagined I would have. That there's a sort of to use the biblical language, a kind of a dying to self that goes along with being sort of the public voice and challenging the frameworks of the academy, is that I had to accept that I might lose respect from certain people that I wish I had it from. And that's just part of the price.
Yeah, I think as someone who is I wonder if there's a gender thing to that, for you, because myself, who is masculine of center and masculine presenting, um, I could care less if people respected me, because I believe that I'm following a vocational call. And so I just wonder if that is about socialization and how we were socialized in the academy and in our families. Um, because I call the academy self-perpetuating elitism, and I don't want to participate in that. I want to participate in everyday life, and I want to have conversations that make impact. Um, I signed a contract with Duke last year, and so I'm teaching for the next 5 years there.
Oh, wow.
And I start my classes with this this classroom is about conversation. So I'm trying to steward a different kind of pedagogy too in the classroom. And I mean, I'm grateful for the opportunity to teach things like queer theology, queer theory at a place like Duke, who needs it awfully bad. And also some of the most rewarding things that I have to do are when I talk with immigrant women who are just trying to figure out the next gig to keep their children safe. Right. I mean, it's not about being in the academy to me. And so I try to bring these experiences into my classroom to help shift the discourse a little bit, because I think that we are respecting the wrong kinds of people. I think our colleagues are respecting the wrong kinds of people. It's a respect for a kind of perfectionism that is steeped in supremacy culture. It's a respect for patriarchy. It's a respect for law and order that is harmful. It's death bringing, right? Um, it's the one thing that I've not fretted about to this extent, to this point, because I think I have a love-hate relationship with the very thing that has given birth to my ideas.
That's really, I can't even imagine anybody saying something more insightful to me to help me understand my own life. And I really appreciate that, because I think that what is at play for a person like myself, a generation older, and so different expectations of women who were born in the middle part of the 20th century, of course. But there is a real kind of, it's at work at the Amy Coney Barrett hearings too. There's a real expectation that women who look the part, white women who look the part of what it's stereotypically a white woman is supposed to look like, is truly expected to support the patriarchy.
Right.
And when we don't, the consequences for our lives are vicious.
Yeah.
And often invisible.
Mm-hmm.
To outsiders. You almost have to be a sort of, I mean, and part of my shtick for several years, this is early in my career, I was saying all this radical stuff, and I would show up at events wearing a little black dress with pearls. And, that was kind of the signal, hey, I'm one of you, listen to me. And, the blonde bob and the glasses and the, little toddler and the whole deal. That was a sign of, I'm like you. But then I would open my mouth and start sharing stuff. Yeah. And it consistently got me into intense trouble. Whereas certainly I knew men who were my colleagues who would say the exact same thing, and they got paid twice as much as I did for going into the same room and saying the same stuff. And so the viciousness of patriarchy really does express itself when women who appear to fit turn out to be subversive. And that's certainly a price that I've paid. And I appreciate you saying that, because I realized that I didn't realize that it mattered to me until you said it.
Yeah.
Because it's hurt me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of harm. I mean, I could imagine that we could sit down over a cafecito and exchange stories of harm. And because there's been gender harm to me, colleagues refusing to call me by the appropriate pronoun, and other things, right, that show up. But there's manifold harm, and I'd rather be doing this work in this capacity than peddling elitism and reaching cis white men who are military chaplains, which is, like, for some reason, cis white men are very interested in my classes in queer theology.
Wow.
And several of them are in the military, and it's just, I mean, I'm not pro-military, I mean, I couldn't be the furthest away from that, but these dudes show up for my class and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. But so I hope we get to have that cafecito sometime.
I really do too. I mean, just your wisdom there was a gift. So thank you about that. And this is just part of the pain of the whole thing. I said to Tripp, as we got on before the recording happened, he asked me how I was doing, and I said, I think I have a little bit of PTSD this week. And the reason is that I was literally watching my experience as a very stereotypically feminine looking white woman playing itself out on that screen with Amy Coney Barrett, and seeing a woman who was not resisting the patriarchy, and yet, just completely giving into it, and to the point of negating herself in order to please the men who were sitting in that room to get the job. And realizing that, I mean, that was just such a vision of how women like me cooperate with patriarchy and literally cause harm by not saying anything. And I haven't been able to sleep this week. And it's because of that, because I know that could have been me. And at an earlier part of my life, in some ways, was me, until I decided to follow that same kind of authenticity that you just expressed. I just gave up caring. It's like giving up the respect, giving up the job title, just being who I am.
My leaving the academy really started right after I defended my dissertation in 2015, even though I had a faculty position in Berkeley at PSR. And I was actually at Wild Goose, and Alba Onofrio said to me, "You're disconnected from your roots."
Oh.
And she said three things to me: you're disconnected from your roots, you're not agnostic, and you're still becoming. Now, I had just written a dissertation on the philosophy of the body becoming, right? And so for them to say to me, "You're still becoming," and like just voice these things. So I left Wild Goose in 2015 and went back to California, and it was as if those statements were seared in my brain. And I think it was the Holy Spirit. I mean, I'm sorry to use that traditional language, but I think it was the Spirit who was guiding Alba to say those things to me. And it was really that exchange at Wild Goose, on the grounds at Wild Goose, that I was like, I've got to come home. I've got to, like, oh my God, Alba's right. I've got to reach, because I had done so, I'm the first generation to graduate high school, first generation to go to college. No one in my family has been to graduate school. Certainly no one has a PhD. My Mexican mother has a 6th grade education, And so I had outperformed so many of my colleagues, published more than them during my PhD program.
Yeah.
And I had done all this only to find out I was killing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And killing it's like when you cut down a tree in the forest, all the other trees suffer. I was not only harming myself, but I was harming my community, because I was so disconnected from the Latinx community, from the queer community, from the trans community. And so my coming home to the South and giving up that self-perpetuating elitism was not just to come home for myself, but to come home for those who don't have access to the things that I had. And I had spent time at Harvard and all these great places during my PhD program, Princeton for the Hispanic Theological Initiative. And, I'm just like, that's not the life that I want. I want a life where I can have people over at my house, where I can cook for them, where we can have, growing up, theology happened at the kitchen table. That's how culturally it worked. And even my abuela, before she passed away, she was still talking about popular religion and talking theology at the breakfast table. And I'm like, that's the kind of theology I want to be doing, which is why I think I'd rather write trade books than academic books, even though academic publishers are soliciting, like, let's publish you, and I'm like, I want to be in conversation. I want to see things change in a mechanical way and in a visionary way. And in order to do that, I must leave the academy.
Okay. I want you to know that one question led to a very significant, beautiful conversation. So now I'm trying to decide, there's no way you'll answer all 5 of them if they all lead to that high quality of exciting conversation. So I'm going to pick one of the fun ones next. All right. Dr. Robyn has lots of sweet tattoos. I've never heard them talk about choosing a tattoo. What kind of advice would Robyn give on choosing a meaningful tattoo about their roots? And if Dr. Bass had to get a tattoo that followed said rules, what would she get?
Oh my gosh. My 23-year-old is now listening with bated breath.
So we have to get the tattoo, the logic and everything about it, the process, the story of the tattoo, which I'm like, shit, Robyn's been on the podcast so many times. Why have I never thought of this question? And then?
And who is this asking questions that has seen me so up close to know that I have so many tattoos?
Look, we've done enough live streaming. I believe that the group, half the people that were in this were in Theologies of Resistance class that we did together. So they've.
Oh, I was in a tank for most of that because it was early in the morning for me. And yeah.
Yeah, well, we know it wasn't late night because you're my coolest friend that goes to bed before 10, Robyn.
So I guess I have to answer this first to see, Diana, if you would follow this. So for me, tattoo is a spiritual practice, and it is about moving energy, and it is about connecting with the image. And so I have a lot of Aztec imagery on my body, a lot of Nahuatl stuff, and that is about connecting to my ancestors. So I think about when I get a tattoo, how can I connect further to my ancestors with a piece of art that might tell a story. So, for example, after I finished my dissertation, I got Coyoshakwe tattooed on my right arm. Coyoshakwe is a creation narrative from the Aztecs. She's also the moon goddess. Now, I live with depression and anxiety, and so when there's a full moon, my moods are really affected by that. and I am awake longer at night when there's a full moon. So for me, Koyoshakui was not just about having a creation narrative and participating in creation every day, but it was about, it's a dismembered woman that's on my right arm. And so for me, that's how I felt after I finished my dissertation. I felt dismembered.
Oh my gosh, that isn't true. I don't know what is.
So I felt this sort of real existential reality of being dismembered, but also that I wanted to connect with my ancestors of being part of a creation myth. And I live with depression, and so the moon goddess. So like that's an example of that tattoo. So for me, when I get tattoos, it's about connecting with my ancestors, connecting with my people, and trying to live a better story through my body.
Wow. I think I could literally say that I had never had a tattoo question directed at me. And this is really interesting and challenging. Just to kind of go back real quick to the previous question, because there was a place I wanted to end up. Robyn, did you ever read the poem by Joy Harjo called Perhaps the World Ends Here?
No.
That's actually Joy, is the poet laureate of the United States, and she's a Native American woman. And she has this amazing poem. I just pulled it up. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. And then the poem goes on from there, describing how this Native woman sees the world centered around the kitchen table. It's one of my favorite poems. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure you knew about it if you didn't already.
Yeah, thank you.
Now I guess with the tattoo question, one, I love your explanation about spiritual practice and that it's about moving energy around. I actually, that's the first time I ever heard anybody say that about tattoos, and it helps me understand it better, being a middle-class girl from the middle Atlantic, from a middling place from the middle of the 20th century, where we would have, people literally didn't think about any kind of body art like that. My father had tattoos, but that was because he was drunk and he was in the Navy. And it was that was how my dad got tattoos. And so other than that, if you were not going to be a drunk sailor, a polite, middle-class girl would never have gotten tattoos. And that's kind of the story of my life, is moving from polite middle-class girl to being who I am now. And so but I understand what you're saying, because one of the spiritual practices I like the best is Reiki. And one of my dearest friends, over the last 25 years, a person who has been a spiritual companion with me through my whole writing career and really through my path of motherhood, a woman who's 15 years older than me, has been my Reiki person and has taught me tons about Reiki and shared with me from what is a deep spiritual practice in her life, and opened me up to thinking about energy and how energy manifests itself in our bodies. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I never really thought about tattoos in relationship to that. So I get that. Now, what would I do? I don't want to be a copycat, but all of a sudden I thought to myself, my name is amazing. And I don't know what my mother was thinking about when she named me Diana, which is the goddess of the moon and the goddess of the hunt.
Yeah.
And both of those things have helped me through the years understand my life. And that whole thing about the alternative cycle being geared towards the moon and the night, and how that has impacted me as a thinker, as a poet, as a writer, as a feminist. I mean, that's very powerful to me. But that second image of Diana, she's both the goddess of the moon and the hunt. And that's, I think, the place that has kind of gotten me in trouble over the years, is the arrow, the quiver with the arrow, the rightly directed arrow. And that's how I can be when I'm either acting in the capacity of a writer, but sometimes in the capacity of debate, or the capacity of trying to take down falsehood. And so both of those things I love about my name. And if I was getting a tattoo, I think I would pursue that same imagery of the goddess of the moon and the goddess of the hunt, because she has been my patron.
That's awesome.
The entire way.
I love that.
Oh my God. I'm glad I'm both of your friends. Wow. All right. So what you're saying is that should we get 2021 Wild Goose and they still have the tattoo
my gosh.
tent, that we might do a live podcast while y'all get matching tattoos. That's what I heard. You don't have to confirm it now. You don't have to confirm it now. I'm just saying. Like, who doesn't want a hunting moon tattoo? And it might become the most popular tattoo at Wild Goose. There's probably a Guinness Book of World Records for most people to get identical badass tattoos at a hippie Christian music and arts festival. So, like, who knows?
I always used to ask my Methodist mother why she named me after a pagan goddess, and it's like, why did she name me like Susan, or something that was very middle, 20th century. She said, I don't know. She said, Diana just spoke to me.
All right.
There you go. All right. So the next question, let's see. Let's do this. All right. This one, there's discussion under it, but the discussion before the question was multiple people talking about how it has felt to hear our ongoing conversations with both of you on the podcast as friends. And they said, one of the things we love about Dr. Robyn and Dr. Bass is the way they have no shame or hesitation in pushing back or challenging something you say, insisting that what they contribute is as equal, if not more awesome than what you're saying. And we're just jealous. So, and on the stories are related to it, were a couple of female ministers who are trying to figure out how to define themselves in this intense political moment in congregations where it could be off-putting. And the natural habit for those that don't see their location as one that comes with power is to compromise and edit in advance. And so what kind of advice do you give for people who admire the way both of you have integrity and authenticity in your voice and own your own energy and space with such beautiful moon-like huntress abandon? And like, what kind of advice do you give for people in that space? The conversation around it was great, but I'm fascinated to hear it. And considering y'all are batting like 1,000 times 10, I don't know. I'm eager. And by the way, just so you two know, if my video disappears, that's because if it disappears, I can put y'all side by side on the screen and they don't watch my face. They just see you two. I realized you were making weird faces and I didn't tell you this in advance. We'll see if I remember to edit this part out of the podcast. But
well, I actually have, I think, kind of a quick answer for this. And that is, be willing to make mistakes. If you're moving past a life of immediately thinking of yourself in terms of compromise and edit, I've said so many things that, I shouldn't have said. And some of it that's gotten me into enormous trouble. And yet it was the stuff that got me often into trouble that taught me the most about how to be able to be fully myself in the public square. And so not fearing mistakes is very important, especially I guess here also it's very situational, is an issue I think that white women face a lot more than women of color, who I have seen in my own experiences. My friends and colleagues are often more at the ready to just say what they really think, whereas white women, again, in the compromise with the patriarchy, will hang back a lot more. And I've just kind of learned, okay, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to offend people. And that's just, I'm sorry, but that's going to happen. And what happens, of course, as you grow with that, you begin to develop the capacity for saying the right thing at the right time, because you make mistakes. Next time you don't make that same mistake, and you learn to listen better, and you feel braver about who you are and how you want to say something. And so it's really a process of practicing how to speak in public and what you want to say. And I there are times I do compromise and edit still, but I compromise and edit what I choose to compromise and edit, and not what someone expects me to compromise and edit. And so anytime that I am trying to like bring people into a circle, I make sort of I make choices about how I'm going to constitute that circle with my language and with the stories I'm sharing, and how I want the circle to feel comfortable. And so sometimes that does involve certain kinds of edits, but they're not the edits that take away from my fundamental authenticity. They're edits that are made for the sake of community. And that's just kind of the way that it works for me. And the other thing is too, we haven't talked about quite as much. And this is something I really would like us to get into conversation with at Wild Goose, is age and ageism. There is incredible freedom that comes for women as they get older. And yet there are ways in which we want to try to avoid the wisdom and the powerful voices of older women in this culture. And so for especially younger people who might be listening to this, it's a journey. It's a trial and error. It is practice. And you will get to a place, if you're self-conscious about it, if you want to have that kind of voice, you will have it. And it's just part of the process of growing into yourself, and that takes time.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't identify with much of what is normative, and so I had to find my authentic voice outside the logic of the norm, which I wonder if that's what some cis women, find themselves to be in clashing with what is normative. But as a trans person, as a Latinx, as a queer person, I learned to just tell my truth. And I think that I had the attitude of, I give two shits what people think about my truth, because it's my truth. And that's something important for me to share. And so I began sharing on the basis of what is true. But I will say that when I was in the academy, I would compromise and edit much more than I do now, because when you're in the academy, it's about a performance. So any institutional framing will require a particular kind of performance. And I was like, I don't want to play that game. That's not the dance I want to dance. I want to dance this other dance that is truer to who I am. And so I think that learning to unhinge from the performance and learning to tell stories and learning how to talk about embarrassing moments when the lamb got away from me during a 4-H event and pulled me, to the ground, and I hung on to the lamb, like I tell embarrassing stories, and because I'm human, and if I can't be human and do this work, then I'm doing the wrong kind of work. And so for me, it was about leaving the self-perpetuating elitism and becoming more human with myself, which is why I invite everyone to my front porch, because I'm like, look, and I hate celebrity culture. It's so toxic. I'm just a human. It's why I reply to everyone who follows me on Twitter, because I'm just a human trying to do work, trying to build a better world. And when I remember that, then I don't find myself capitulating as much when I really sink into being human. And I think that's what I would encourage people to do who are struggling to find their power. Remember that you're human. And also, I live with someone who I constantly remind, do you know how fierce you are? Do you know how powerful you are? We need to be reminded of who we are. We need to be reminded when we come into our power. And so for those clergy women who need a buddy, reach out to me. I'll tell you, because we need to be told we are up to something good, because the world tells me and tells you, Diana, that we're aberrations. We're peddling in the wrong kind of field. Well, no, we're just telling our truth. We're just being human. We're cultivating humanity.
Oh man. All right. That was so good. And I imagined it'd be good. So we'll do one more question, because I know Dr. Robyn's going to give a lecture in a little while online, because no one gets to go visit places when they give lectures, says the guy who digitally visited Vienna last week and could have gone in person. This question came out of in a previous conversation. Diana mentioned her book she just finishing up about Jesus and all the different Jesuses she's encountered in her life. And in the process of working through her own story, like, had to reacquaint herself with these early experiences of Jesus in a more conservative and evangelical context, and see what she rediscovers there and such. Dr. Robyn, in their most recent book, Activist Theology, processes their own story and narrative. So for those of us, I've done 2 books on Jesus. Jesus is not my theological issue at this point, but the us would be those that voted for this question. For those of us that have a very conflicted relationship with Jesus, Facebook status, it's complicated. What are those earliest moments that may mean something different that you plant a flag in to help you reflect on the complexity and fluctuation of that relationship? And what kind of advice do you give for people that are still processing, like, in what ways do I want to or what the language was blessing and cursing in the discussion? What ways has your relationship with Jesus blessed you and cursed you, and how do you lean into the blessing?
Wow.
And my familiarity with both of you, like, in my head, I already guessed different things y'all might pick. So if you pick something different, this would just be fun. I was like, man, this question is good, and why don't I get to talk about it? That was my general thought.
Oh gosh, I would have. I'm editing this book this week. Oh, and so that means
you're deciding if it's the part you edited out that you just want to say it, or if it's a part that's in the book.
That's really interesting because, of course, when you write a book, you put everything in and your editor comes back and says, no, edit that out. And so I'm always fighting with editors about editing. So anyway, but I'm doing final edits and so I'm rereading it. And one of the stories that's in the book is it got moved. It was originally in the beginning and is now in the end. And what it is a story about my first memory of Jesus, which was a really interesting and kind of healing thing for me to do, is to sit down and go back in my own head and say, what do I first remember about Jesus? And so my first memory of Jesus, I don't think I told this story on this podcast. I haven't told the story very much. But my first memory of Jesus, I must have been about 2.5, maybe. So this is one of my first memories on top of everything else. And I was in the big girl bed and my baby brother was still in the crib in the same room that I was in. And I was terrified of the dark. And so my mother had put next to the big girl bed a small plastic glow in the dark manger scene. And it wasn't electric. It was plastic. It was one of those ones that absorbs light and then glows. And that functioned as my nightlight. And so this thing sat next to me on my bed. And I had a vague memory of this, and I confirmed it with my mother before she passed away. So I know that this actually happened, is that there was one night when I was screaming, just this baby kind of sound. And my mother comes running into the bedroom and she goes, Diana, what's the matter? What's the matter? And I'm pointing to my mouth and I'm saying, just. And so my mother figured out that I was actually saying Jesus teeth. And she pulled over my gum, and there between my baby teeth was the head of the baby Jesus that I had bitten off of the glow in the dark manger. And so
oh, this is great.
So this is my first memory of Jesus, is that apparently I wanted to be so close to the baby Jesus is that I ate him. And so, what doesn't that say about my life? It says like so much about sacramental theology and and oneness and all this kind of stuff, and light, being the light. I wanted to be the light myself, have the light radiate out of me. I mean, there's a million theological lessons in this goofy story. And that's my first memory of Jesus, biting the head off of the plastic baby Jesus that was in the glow in the dark manger next to my bed. And that is something that just helps to frame out, who I've always been, and what's not a blessing there. And, the other thing too, is that I guess it's a little bit of a curse because it's hard to swallow sometimes, being that much of a Jesus person. And that's just who I am. So yeah, the whole project was amazing like that. And what I did is I thought back to each one of these really significant times in my own life when I was my earliest memory of Jesus, memories of Jesus from preschool, memory of Jesus from elementary school, memories of Jesus from middle school, memories of Jesus that take me up to really now. And I tell the sort of spiritual and theological story about all of those Jesuses that I have remembered. And that, Robyn, really ties in with your interest in experience, because what I try to do in this new project is to set aside the argument about the historical Jesus versus the Jesus of history versus the Christ of theology, and try to figure out what is the Jesus we live, and then invite my readers into that place, for whatever blessings and cursings, or blessings and banes actually come out of that. And there are banes in the book, like the day I was almost arrested with a group of sex workers on the street corner in Santa Barbara because I was witnessing to them. I was about 19 years old, and I was trying to do the good work of Jesus, and the police came by and tried to pick me up with the girls. And so there I am getting ready to be put into the back of the van when one of the, what I would have euphemistically called at that time and do in the narrative, because I keep putting myself in the time that the narrative was written, when I was a nice 19-year-old evangelical girl in Southern California at a Christian college, ladies of the evening. So one of the ladies of the evening looked at me, looked at the police officer, and said to the cops, you know, "She's not with us." And I was just like, well, wait a second. What do you mean? I'm standing here. I'm talking to you. I love you in Jesus' name. And she looked at the cop and she said, "Don't put her in the van. She's a Jesus girl."
No incarnational ministry for you.
Right. I got so upset because I thought, oh my gosh, Jesus would go in the van with the ladies of the evening. You know, where would Jesus be? He'd be in the back of the van going to jail with the prostitutes. And yet I got left on the corner because I was the Jesus girl, and I watched the police drive off with the sex workers in the back of the truck. And so that's like one of the stories I tell in the book, ruminating on my naivete. And yet what a rich story that is too, about who we really are, and where is community, and that woman would look at me and say, "Oh, don't bring her with us. She's the Jesus girl." And how that just struck at my heart. I didn't want to be separated by being the Jesus girl. I wanted to be with other women, no matter who they were or what they did, because I thought that that's where Jesus would be. So that's just a little bit of my story. Don't be afraid of the Jesuses that you've known, in other words, to people who are listening to us, because there's more surprise in those stories than what you might think. And interpret them your way, not the way that somebody else tells you to interpret those stories.
I love that. I think that I have encountered Jesus in a lot of ways, from being 10 years old at Macedonia Baptist Church and responding to an altar call because I knew that if I accepted Jesus into my heart, that all would be well. I was living in poverty. I had an abusive parent, and this was going to be the thing that fixed it. And I share that to say there's something really beautiful in just trusting in the wild abandon of a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that really compels me is when I was taught that Jesus is my brother, and my brother was crucified by the state, and he is now an ancestor, and we are about to embark on Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, where we will remember our ancestors here at our house. And so I will remember my brother as a living ancestor who continues to guide me. And it was something about Jesus as my brother that revolutionized my whole theology, because it flattened the hierarchy and it made me equal to this brown Palestinian Jew who was just trying to reform the system. And as I am trying to revolutionize the system in community, Jesus as my brother goes with me and ahead of me and comes up behind me. And so as I think about the work that I'm doing now, that my ancestors are pushing at my back, and Jesus is one of them. And I think there are lots of ways to interpret Jesus. We can talk about the toxicity of atonement theology and whatnot, but but I want to talk about the relationship piece, the humanity piece of who Jesus is. And if we can steward a better narrative around the relationship and around the humanity of Jesus, we might get to a better theology of Jesus.
Yeah, too often the Christ of faith piece, I think, really inhibits that. People want to they want to get the doctrinal, the creedal piece right.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So, I mean, as someone who's had to adopt to the UK marking system, that was a top tier conversation. This is not even going to request significant edits, and as in a context where it only takes a 70 to be good, I'll put y'all at least in the 80s and maybe higher.
Well, you are a top tier host, Tripp, and we would put you in the 70s or maybe the 80s or maybe even higher.
Well, who knows? I don't want to peak, until I'm interviewing you both getting matching tattoos at Wild Goose. But I do want to thank Dr. Robyn for hanging out with us. And I know that they are going to give a lecture at a university online soon. So maybe before you hop off, you want to tell everyone the best place to find you online and such. That way, newbies can discover the reason Diana and I both really appreciate your work, voice, and get to know the person they just heard more.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's just been such a joy. And Diana, we really should be talking more often. And I hope that we can begin some traditions of showing up and exchanging ideas and talking. Folks can find me on the front porch most days, but if you're looking for me digitally, then you can find me at iRobyn on Instagram and Twitter. And would love to be in conversation with folks. I am a big believer of conversation. That is what will help steward a better humanity. And just really grateful to have this opportunity to chat with y'all.
Awesome. Is Aaron behind you?
Aaron is getting the kid. We just adopted a cat.
Aaron.
So
I know I stalk you on the internet and pretend that we might hang out in the near future.
Yeah.
Like as someone whose COVID impact has led to, this is the longest I've been without seeing someone that lives in my house who's known me for more than 2 years in my entire life. I'm pretty sure I'm like significantly depressed and longing to, one, like see someone I know and get a hug, have the Eucharist, and then like have craft beers and argue about religion and politics in person. And
do you know that I reached out to a priest and asked if I could receive the Eucharist from them, because I'm like, this is bullshit.
Yeah,
I should have communion, and I'm tired of doing this, like what I am preaching online, and then they do the Eucharist with whatever you have, like an Oreo and a cup of coffee. I'm like, can I just go show up to a priest and receive the Eucharist, please? So anyways, that's going to happen at some point.
Yeah.
Did he or she let you?
Yeah, it's Becca Stevens here in Nashville who runs Thistle Farm.
Oh, good.
And so she is going to facilitate that. We just got to work out the date.
Fantastic.
That's awesome. But Robyn, I love you tons. I'm very grateful for our friendship and thrilled that you and Aaron have a new cat. I'm looking forward to cat pictures on Instagram and seeing what people on the internet think of your lecture you're about to give. So you can disappear before I get all heartfelt, because it's late here. So the fact that I saved a high quality Saison for your appearance on this.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say I love you too, and I miss you, and I can't wait for us to hang out. I'm wishing that we were back in San Diego eating pizza eating soup with Jeremy.
Praise the Lord, Jeremy Fackenthal. And Diana, Robyn and I have some very serious tag team karaoke skills. So Now, the secret of karaoke, if you want to treat karaoke as a sacramental endeavor, it's not quality, it's investment. Right? Like
passion.
Yeah, because the passion correlates ontologically, I've heard. Kind of like how a wafer turns into the body of the second person of the Trinity. High quality investment. And singing, I don't know, like come to my window, I'll be
like
home
Melissa
soon.
Etheridge.
Yeah, just all of a sudden.
Perfect karaoke.
Yeah, all of a sudden, like the Holy Sophia is just like, you should come to my window.
That's great.
I'll be home like very soon. Very soon.
All right. I'm going to head out to this lecture.
Great to be with you, Robyn. Thank you so much. You are one wise person.
Thank you. Thank you. So good to see y'all. Bye.
Bye. That was fun.
Well, I'm better at Broadway.
Well, I can do that as I don't know if you know this. I went to arts magnet school for middle school and high school, and then was a musical theater and philosophy major in undergrad.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I was not very good at musical theater. I was really shy about my voice when I was younger, but I actually have a pretty decent singing voice. But I did take 3 years of theater.
You know what I found to be for someone whose natural singing voice is on they should be in a 90s grunge band side of life. Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows was I got the lead all 3 times. I used it as my audition piece.
Wow.
Do you remember that song? It was popular in the 40s. So it was like my grandmother liked that song.
Oh my, that's sweet.
Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. Everything that's wonderful is what I feel when we're together.
You sound like you should be in High School Musical.
A lucky penny. When it's clear the rain goes, disappears, dear, and I feel so fine. Just to know you are mine.
Oh,
my
excellent.
Life is sunshine. Yeah, I would do it all cheesy over the top, and they're like, "Well, if he can do that, and we know he's in a rock band, he could probably do whatever we need him to do." That was the MO.
Well, you were a youth pastor for a while, weren't you?
Oh, which means you can basically do all things through Christ who gives you strength.
Well, and you can also sing crazy, goofy songs all the time.
Oh, man. I know G, C, D, E minor, and had a capo, which means I could basically play anything at a D minus level, which with gusto, caffeine, and a basement
is remarkably like karaoke.
Yeah. Yeah. At theology beer camps, before COVID, big homebrew event, we will sell tickets to the members and then sell the rest. And so it'd be like a group of we usually sell 99 tickets except for the theologians. And it's at a brewery or a church that lets us bring in kegs. And the second night is karaoke night. And there's either a band or we get a karaoke person. Right. And it's mid to late 90s karaoke. And I will have 4 wireless microphones in my pocket. And that whole time during happy hour the first day, I walk around and get people to tell me their favorite karaoke song. And I'm taking notes and then correlating it and going back to them through the day so that on karaoke night, I have a list of 4 people
that you're going to go
that I know will sing every song. And what do I always make sure is on at least each song? A youth minister. Because you know what that youth minister is going to do? If they're handed a microphone and you're singing Bulls on Parade, Rage Against the Machine with these 3 people. Youth minister is going to go nuts with that microphone and get the other 3 that may be introverts to go nuts.
Right.
And the greatest thing you can do if you're throwing a live event is figure out who the youth ministers are, because they know what to do with 30, 14-year-olds in a room. And if you can manage the social awkwardness of that, you can carpe diem social awkwardness in other moments.
Now you're just making me miss things like this.
I've heard of social gatherings.
I have too. There's a rumor that there once in history were people who got together in the same room and sang songs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I hope that will be us again.
Me too.
Soon. And at least there, you all in Scotland, you're taking it seriously. Here we have been left to die by the current administration. And all we can do is, I know that, whatever, Joe Biden isn't people's favorite choice, but at least he probably isn't going to try to purposefully kill us because he doesn't believe in a disease. So there are upsides to voting for Joe Biden.
The crazy thing is, even if it's like lambasting, you still have to have months of whatever you want to call the turd show. See, I self-edited, even though
right.
It's later here. I self-edited. I was like, it's not 11 o'clock for everybody.
Right. We are going to have difficult weeks ahead, and so it's been good to be with you two and to just kind of talk about some things that really matter and are so important, and to laugh about them. And I really encourage people, find some space for laughter, for sleep, distraction. These things are going to be good spiritual practices over the next I think the next 2 weeks are going to be particularly difficult because we have to get to the election. And I suspect that, it's going to be a few days or maybe a week after, if we're really lucky, we'll have a very good sense of the winner sometime within a framework of the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hoping and pulling for. And I hope that particular part won't go on any longer. And I know people are really scared about violence. Do whatever you can to be a good friend. If you can just go outside of the polls and wave at people while they're going in, or figure out a way to, bring food to folks who are standing in line, whatever would help your neighbors feel comfortable and safe while they're voting. Do what you can safely with your mask and all that kind of good stuff.
So the question I didn't ask.
Yeah, we do have to finish up tonight.
I know it's a very short one, and I'll answer it first because I've thought of it because I saw it hours ago. Was what line, knowing what's going to happen election week and the week after, would you add to your nightly prayer? And so you can think about that, and I'll even turn your camera off so they don't see you. Think about it while I answer mine.
I want to hear what you're going to say. People can see my face go.
Okay. All right. Well, here's mine. I was talking, I was doing nighttime ritual with Cora, our 6-year-old, and last night, and each day I'll ask her, what's something super special of the day you want to tell God thank you for? And then she said yesterday, for the giggles. And I just feel like that nobody, no situation, even in the worst situations, can take all the gift of life from you. And so in the prayer, that should include desire for justice, for voices that have been silenced to be recognized, for voices to be harnessed for future generations who are impacted by our choices. There's also this desire for God every moment for us to receive whatever the gifts of life in the moment are. And so say thank you for all the little giggles that may happen for little reasons. And you know what hers was? She called me in the bathroom. She said, Daddy, I went poopy and I'm having a hard time wiping. And she was having a hard time for normal digestive reasons. If your dad said yes, didn't pay attention, and a bag of, we don't get them very often from America, Cheetos disappeared. And the toilet paper didn't cooperate with my fingers while wiping correctly. And it was very embarrassing. If you're a girl who had her dad come help because you had issues and you're learning to take care of this correctly.
Right.
And then he has to clean his hand very dramatically. And I start laughing, and then she starts laughing hilariously now that she has permission. Right. And I'm like, no, it is funny, Cora. And she's laughing. I said, now just remember I did this because one day I'm going to be old and might ask for help. And she was like, what? And that whole like thing was giggles. And so when she said that, she was like, well, you remember you had poopy on your hand. Right. And yeah, there's a moment that story might be the most memorable thing for that day. It doesn't have to do with the fact of all the other stuff going on, even as important it is. It's like, seize those giggles is my recommendation. Figure out what in the prayer, what was the giggle of the day, and then say, God, thank you. Because as your resident Whiteheadian, God not only notices what happens, but experiences your experience with you. So that means that God enjoys the giggles, the orgasms, the high quality glasses of wine with a friend, and high quality jokes just as much as God shares in our suffering, our pain, and everything else. So there you go.
Well, I actually love that. That is like, you could make a sermon out of that, because it's a sermon about how what we perceive as moments of shame, for the person who is with us in that moment. You can take a moment of shame, what could be shame, and turn it into humiliation and really hurt and wound someone. Or you can take what could have been a moment of shame and turn it towards joy. And to me, that's just a fundamental definition of the work that's been done for us in salvation, is that what could have been a shame and a humiliation has been turned towards joy. And what a great dad moment, and what a great pastoral moment. So I just appreciate that. I'm in kind of awe of that story right now. So as for praying, I have been praying, help, help, help. I kind of go with the old Anne Lamott, help, thanks, wow, triad of prayers. I think that's about the most worthy framework for this moment. Help is necessary. Thanks, you explained the beauty of thanks, to be able to turn a moment of despair into a moment of joy. That's what thanks does. And wow, there's still amazing moments of wow. Last night I was in the backyard and the sun was setting. The sun's going down earlier now, and the moon was rising. You can tell it's moving towards full moon, and it came up between the trees, and the sky was still a little bit light. The moon was beautiful, and it was the day that of course the story from NASA came out about there being water in these shadows that are on the moon. And I was thinking about the water on the moon and how beautiful the night was, and I just went, wow. It's all around us, and that cannot be taken away ever. That's what Elie Wiesel said he leaned on in the camps, was thanks and wow. And the gratitude and awe are with us. If we're human beings and we just take that breath, life offers us those moments in even the worst of circumstances.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for everyone online hanging out. Thank you for Dr. Robyn for joining. Next week.
They were awesome.
Oh, I know. Yeah. And next week, you get to meet one of my other best friends online, Adam Clark, who we did our Black Theology reading group together recently, student of James Cone, brilliant thinker, and works at a Jesuit school. So like, as a Black theologian who's also an Episcopalian and works across ecumenical reasons and works with Catholics and spends time on the activism on the ground, like one of the coolest, thoughtful people. I'm super pumped. And we're going to process the day after. So last election, the day after.
So it's Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last year, 4 years ago, day after podcast, I hope that my chemical makeup is better than 4 years ago. You know, I almost don't think it's possible for it to be worse because of what it was. So,
Yeah.
But I am looking forward to that conversation. And those of you that sent in questions that were specifically coming out of the Black theology class, we'll talk about them next week because, you know, I'm not a Black theologian and Diana isn't either. And why not go to the authority when you can have one? So.
And what an interesting group of guests we've had over the course of this experience together. And oh gosh, you all have made this month much better than it would have otherwise been. So,
oh yeah,
thank you for all the questions. They've really made me think about what's going on much more. It's helped to change me during this difficult period. So I'm very grateful for the time we spent together here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll see you next week.
Great.